The crisp autumn air drifted through the parking lot of a large home improvement store on the edge of town. Customers pushed overloaded shopping carts between rows of pickup trucks, while employees hurried to help load lumber, bags of cement, and heavy landscaping supplies. Among the crowd was Ethan Carter, a hardworking single father in his late 30s. Wearing a worn brown field jacket over a charcoal gray shirt and faded blue jeans, Ethan had stopped after work to buy materials to repair the leaking roof of the small house where he lived with his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Life hadn't been easy since losing his wife 5 years earlier. Every extra dollar went toward Lily's education, and every weekend was spent fixing the house instead of resting. Even so, Ethan never ignored someone who needed help. As he pushed his cart toward his old pickup truck, he noticed an elderly gentleman standing beside a luxury black truck parked a few spaces away. The distinguished man, dressed in a tailored navy suit despite the casual setting, was struggling to lift several heavy wooden beams into the truck bed. Store employees were busy helping other customers, and people walked past without stopping. Without thinking twice, Ethan parked his cart, walked over, and smiled politely. "Need a hand, sir?" he asked. The elderly man looked up with surprise before returning a warm smile. "I'd appreciate that very much." Working together, they carefully lifted each beam into the truck. Ethan never asked who the man was or why someone dressed like a businessman was loading construction materials himself. He simply helped because it was the right thing to do. When the last beam was secured, the elderly gentleman extended his hand. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Most people today are too busy to stop." Ethan shrugged with a humble smile. "My father taught me that if you can make someone's day a little easier, you should." The older man nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by the answer. Before getting into his truck, he studied Ethan for a moment and asked, "Do you have family?" Ethan's expression softened. "Just my daughter? She's my whole world." The elderly man smiled again, reached into his jacket pocket, and handed Ethan a simple business card. "I'd like you to visit my home tomorrow afternoon," he said. "I believe I'd like you to meet someone very important." Ethan looked down at the elegant card, completely unaware that the kind old man he had just helped wasn't just another customer, and that accepting this invitation was about to change his life forever. The following afternoon, after dropping Lily off at her best friend's house, Ethan drove his old pickup truck to the address printed on the business card. As he turned through the massive wrought iron gates, he slowed the truck in disbelief. Before him stood an enormous stone mansion surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, sparkling fountains, and towering white columns. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, and beyond the estate, snow-capped mountains rose beneath the clear autumn sky. Ethan checked the address twice, convinced he had made a mistake, but it was correct. Before he could decide whether to leave, the front doors opened, and the same elderly gentleman walked down the grand staircase with a warm smile. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Please don't be nervous. You're my guest." Ethan followed him across the courtyard, still wondering why someone living in such extraordinary wealth had invited an ordinary, single father to his home. Inside, the mansion was even more breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers illuminated elegant marble floors. Priceless artwork decorated the walls, and a grand piano overlooked the enormous living room. Yet, despite the luxury surrounding him, the elderly man remained surprisingly humble. "Sit down," he said kindly as a housekeeper served fresh coffee. "Yesterday, when you helped me load my truck, you never once asked who I was or expected anything in return. That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could." Ethan smiled politely. "I only did what anyone should do." The old man slowly shook his head. "No, Mr. Carter, very few people still do." A few moments later, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Ethan looked toward the staircase as a graceful young woman entered the room. She had long chestnut brown hair, kind eyes, and wore a simple yet elegant white dress. She smiled warmly as she approached. The elderly gentleman stood proudly beside her. "Ethan," he said, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Claire." She extended her hand with a friendly smile. "Dad hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday," she said. Ethan smiled awkwardly as they shook hands. He had no idea why such a successful family seemed so interested in him. Then the elderly man took a deep breath and revealed the real reason for the invitation. Claire is the CEO of our family company, he explained. For years, I've searched for someone whose character I could truly trust. Yesterday, I think I finally found that person. Ethan looked at him in complete surprise, unaware that this unexpected meeting was only the beginning of a life-changing journey. For several long seconds, Ethan simply stared at Mr. Harrison, unsure whether he had heard him correctly. "Trust me." "For what?" he asked quietly. The elderly billionaire smiled and folded his hands. "Our company has thousands of employees, dozens of executives, and more money than anyone could spend in a lifetime. But after 40 years in business, I've learned that character is worth more than talent. Yesterday, you helped an old man lift heavy lumber without expecting recognition or reward. Most people saw an old man with work to do. You simply saw someone who needed help." Claire watched Ethan carefully, noticing how uncomfortable he looked surrounded by luxury. Unlike the businessmen she met every day, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't asking about the mansion, the company, or the family's wealth. He only smiled politely and said, "Sir, I appreciate your kindness, but I think you've mistaken me for someone more qualified." Mr. Harrison chuckled softly. "That's exactly why you're here." He walked to the large window overlooking the estate and continued, "For years, investors have introduced me to people with perfect resumes, expensive suits, and impressive speeches, yet many of them lacked honesty. Yesterday, I watched a hardworking, single father stop everything just to help a stranger." He turned back toward Ethan. "That's the kind of person I want around my family." Claire stepped forward with a warm smile. "Dad told me you're raising your daughter by yourself." Ethan nodded. "Her name is Lily. Everything I do is for her." Claire's expression softened. "I'd like to meet her someday." Ethan smiled proudly. "She'd probably ask you 100 questions. She's very curious." The three of them laughed, breaking the tension. A butler quietly entered the room and handed Mr. Harrison a tablet. His smile disappeared as he read the screen. "It seems our board meeting has started early," he said. He looked toward Ethan. "Would you mind joining us for a few minutes?" Ethan looked surprised. "Me? I don't know anything about corporate meetings." Mr. Harrison smiled. "I'm not asking for business advice. I simply want the board to meet the man who reminded me what integrity looks like." Ethan reluctantly agreed, unaware that the meeting he was about to enter would test his honesty in a way no one expected. Some executives were already determined to oppose him before he even walked through the boardroom doors, believing that an ordinary single father had no place in the world of billion-dollar decisions. When Ethan entered the enormous boardroom, conversations immediately stopped. Around the polished walnut table sat some of the country's most influential executives, each dressed in tailored suits with years of corporate experience behind them. Several looked at Ethan with confusion, while others openly questioned why an ordinary construction worker had been invited into such an important meeting. One executive leaned toward another and whispered, "Mr. Harrison must be joking." Another quietly added, "He doesn't belong here." Ethan heard every word but remained calm. Taking the empty chair nearest the door, Mr. Harrison noticed the reactions and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we discuss profits, I'd like you to meet the man who reminded me why this company exists." The room fell silent. An executive named Victor Lawson stood up. "With all due respect, sir, we're here to discuss a multi-million-dollar expansion, not hear stories about strangers from a parking lot." Mr. Harrison calmly replied, "Exactly. That's the problem. We spend every meeting discussing numbers while forgetting the people those numbers represent." He then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, yesterday you helped me without expecting anything in return. Today I'd like to ask you a simple question. If you owned this company, what would you protect first, profits or people?" Ethan thought quietly for a moment before answering. "Without people, there are no profits. Employees who feel respected will build a stronger company than employees who only feel managed." The room became unexpectedly quiet. Even the executives who had dismissed him moments earlier began listening. Claire couldn't hide her smile. She had spent years presenting complex business strategies to the board, Yet Ethan had summarized great leadership in a single sentence. Mr. Harrison nodded proudly. That's the answer I've been hoping someone in this room would give for years. He then made an announcement that stunned everyone. Effective immediately, Ethan Carter will join our Community Leadership Advisory Council. His job isn't to run this company. His job is to remind us never to lose sight of the values that built it. Several board members looked surprised, but none could argue with what they had just witnessed. As the meeting ended, Claire walked Ethan toward the mansion entrance. My father rarely changes his mind about people, she said with a smile. Yesterday you earned his respect by helping him load a truck. Today you earned mine by staying true to yourself. Ethan looked across the gardens before replying, I don't know much about boardrooms or billion-dollar companies, but I know kindness costs nothing. Claire smiled warmly. Sometimes it's the most valuable investment anyone can make. As Ethan drove home in his old pickup truck, he couldn't stop smiling. He had left home believing he was simply helping an elderly stranger in a parking lot. Instead, one small act of kindness had opened a door he never imagined possible. And waiting for him at home was Lily, the person who had always believed her father was the richest man in the world. Not because of money, but because of his heart.